Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are watching me or hearing me from. And it's been an amazing session thus far. It's an amazing experience. You would agree with me. So right about now, we will be going into another conversation, and I have Dr. Carlos, Dr. Drew, yes, is here. Hi, nice to have
Hello.
you. Nice to have you here. So I will just briefly introduce you, and then you would go on with your presentation, and then you would ask questions afterwards. Dr. Carlos Drews is the Executive Vice President for Conservation at Oceanwise, a conservation organization headquartered in Vancouver, Canada. He's responsible for the design and execution of its global ocean conservation strategy, overseeing a portfolio spanning conservation science, marine mammals, plastics, and other pollution. Um, Also, noise, blue carbon, sustainable seafood, the Arctic, marine biodiversity monitoring, as well as citizen action initiatives, including shoreline cleanups. Before that, he served as the executive director of the Jane Goodall Institute USA from 2017 to 2019, a community conservation organization that advances the global vision of Dr. Jane Goodall by improving the lives of people, animals, and the environment. Dr. Drews, you have the floor for the next 10 minutes. We want to hear from you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I am speaking to you from Vancouver, Canada. Actually, I'm speaking from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish nations. And this includes both the land and also the water. And I will be focusing today on the ocean. So why talk about the oceans? The oceans make up, 71% of the planet's surface, but it makes up also 99% of the life area and volume available for life on Earth. So if you ended up living on planet Earth, it is very likely that your life and prosperity is closely linked to the health of the oceans. In fact, every second breath we take, all of us around here, united around World Environment Day, comes from the oceans. But the oceans are also this formidable climate buffer. They have already absorbed 30% or so of the CO2 emissions after the Industrial Revolution, and they have taken on about 90% of the excess heat that we have generated as a result of those emissions. If you take an economic lens, then the market value of marine and coastal resource industries is estimated at $3 trillion US dollars, which is about 5% of the global GDP. So it is quite significant. And then when you take a bit of a livelihoods lens, then 3 billion people, no less than 40% of humankind, relies on marine and coastal biodiversity for their livelihoods. So let me share my screen with you and talk you through nature positivity. Just 3 weeks ago, I was traveling down south to Chile, and I looked out of the plane and I looked at the engine, and I wondered, okay, how is actually this fuel taking me to Chile? What does the fuel consist of? And it turns out that the answer, after a little bit of research, is simple. I was flying on plankton, marine plankton, because marine plankton is at the foundation of the creation of oil. And here on your left, you will see 200 million years ago, 300 million years ago, lots of plankton in the oceans. This is called the marine carbon pump. When it dies, it settles in the sediments, and then gradually it travels through the sediments into these oil deposits that by compactation, by the pressure of the sediment becomes oil. And then many years later, we harvest it, we take it out, and then we ignite it. And then it releases energy, which is this powerful energy we use to propel the engine of my aircraft down to Chile to look at one of our projects. And now this drawdown of carbon that has been turned into oil was a contributor for temperatures on planet Earth gradually sinking from what used to be in the order of 10 to 14 degrees, much warmer than today, 100 million years ago, to what is a very comfortable and pleasant temperature zone today. So a great contributor was then plankton removing carbon, turning it into life, and then cooling the atmosphere. But now we are challenged again with climate change because of our emissions, and we're asking the oceans again, help us draw down carbon, help us sequester that CO2 that causes the greenhouse gas effect, so that we can stabilize the planet. And that's really the journey I am on. And when I ask what is to be nature positive or ocean positive, really I'm coming from a place of challenging the sustainability paradigm of the blue economy, which says we will maximize the economic benefits from harvesting the oceans in a way that does not harm the oceans. But really, do no harm is just not good enough. You have a patient here in the emergency room, oceans are in dire straits, and we are pretending just to keep them alive by doing no harm. That just doesn't work. So nature positive is really the call to bring this patient back into good health so that we can maximize all of those environmental services on which humankind depends. And the oceans are indeed in dire straits. If we look at fisheries, 1/3 or a little bit more of fish stocks are being harvested in ways that are not sustainable. So overfishing continues and the trend is not reducing at all. We have lost more than 50% of the coral reefs since the Industrial Revolution. Just in the last decade, 14% of coral reefs were lost to warming events. So it's quite staggering. And then you can also look at what is called dead zones. And dead zones are areas of the oceans where oxygen is lacking, essentially due to processes like decomposition of lots of algal blooms, and they sink, and then bacteria start working on them and deplete the remaining oxygen, and you get these dead zones, mostly caused by agricultural runoffs. And what in the 70s was the odd 3 or 4 dead zones have now rocketed above 400 dead zones around the planet. Some of the noticeable ones are in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Baltic Sea, in Chesapeake Bay. So it's all quite alarming, and this is really the doom and gloom scenario that I know has to be there, but I want you to turn into more of the good news about it. And the good news is that the scientists have gathered around this publication led by Carlos Duarte and have concluded that we can rebuild marine life and we can restore those ecosystem services in the next 30 years. And there's a roadmap here in this Nature publication. There are pointers as to which ecosystems we need to work on in particular. And it also speaks to how rebuilding fisheries, for example, will produce 80% higher profits by 2030 if we do that right. With coral reefs, well, we cannot probably rebuild them all, but at least we can stop the decline in certain places, and we can certainly rebuild the top marine predators like whales and sharks that are responsible to maintain the health of the trophic web that they rely on. So this is doable. This is a grand challenge for humankind, both from an ethical obligation point of view, but also it is a smart economic objective. And let me tell you a little bit about why that is so. Well, if you and your industry relies on the oceans, you rely on good yields. And yields are important. So you want to have long-term availability of those yields. So there's no point in over-exploiting up to the point where you exhaust your marine resources, right? So I think there is a middle and a long-term thinking here that is important to prevail. The short-sighted approach is economic suicide, essentially. When we think about resilience, it is key for your industry. And if you rely on the health of oyster reefs or a kelp bed where the habitat is offering leaves for herring and herring to reproduce itself and put their eggs, then you want to protect it, but you want to make it resilient so that it doesn't is not lost with the next impact of climate change. So resilience is rebuilding its strength to withstand the impacts that are upcoming and that are inevitable in current climate scenarios. You also want to look at the values. Your values are aligned with your customers if you are an ocean industry. And certainly some of the customers are demanding that value alignment. Take, for example, people who are interested in buying clothes, and that clothes retail store would like to see that the shipping company that transports the clothes, it's absolutely on net zero terms. That is happening already. So shipping companies are responding by introducing the right carbon offsets so that the goods arrive at the other end on a net zero journey. And the consumers are more and more demanding cradle to gravel net zero practices. So there is a market advantage. There is a brand resilience associated to this alignment of values. And also, I would argue, it is just the right thing to do. And doing the right thing is a prime motivator for some of the business leaders that I have been talking to as of recently. That motivation is just to do good. There is also a new business ethic emerging, and I was privileged enough to participate in a high-performance leadership training at IMDB, which is a renowned business school in Lausanne in Switzerland. And it was very impressive to see that the curriculum includes strong elements of not just sustainability, but also being socially responsible. And that becomes just the way business is done. And again, it speaks to this new business ethic, to the alignment between your business, consumers, producers, employee-employer relationships on the right values as well. And last but not least, your own values with that business. If you take the definition of corporate social responsibility, and one definition is that a business has a responsibility to do good, then you can already see it's not to do no harm. It is to do good, actually. It's a subtle difference, but an important, because that's what takes us to net positive. So let's move now to the question of what can organizations, industry, and you do to move to net positive. I will just walk you through a simple example. This is seaweed farming. Of course, seaweeds are super nutritious food, but they are also the origin of alginates, which are found in the pharmaceutical industry, in the food industry. They are just essential for many of our products today, and will become increasingly a solution to plastics as well, as we develop biopolymers from kelp. So what can a seaweed farmer do to stay nature positive? That means leaving the oceans in a better place than you find them when you start your industry. So the pledge is not one of do no harm, is a pledge of restoring and rebuilding marine life. You are creating habitat. You will pick the species that are native to the ocean where you operate. You are creating habitat. You may decide not to harvest the whole thing at the end of the year and to leave 10% behind as habitat for spawning of fish, also for invertebrates that will fit on the kelp that falls onto the sediment. So that is really your way of doing business. You may set aside a portion of the harvest as well for carbon sequestration and measure it so that you are contributing also to offset your carbon footprint. So there are all these different ways of doing business that you can also actually document and measure how much better are the oceans after you leave. And if you install, for example, one of these farms close to an area where the water quality has been degraded, kelp will purify it. Kelp will clean it up. I would also argue that if you are not anywhere close to any of these areas, if you are a landlocked industry, you can still invest in these kind of projects, in anything to do with ocean restoration, with rebuilding marine life, so that you can contribute to the health of the oceans in landlocked places as well, because we all in landlocked places, as I said before, depend on the health of the oceans. So I will walk you quickly through the trip that I did 3 weeks ago. This is Chile, and Chile is a prime habitat for kelp. It hosts a third of the giant kelp of the planet. And some of the indigenous communities are committed to restore the ocean health, to give back. And that takes us to the possibility to restore kelp in large quantities. And restoring kelp is because it has been lost. 40 to 60% of kelp around the planet has been lost. It's a formidable carbon sink. It turns CO2 into tissue, and then eventually a proportion of that tissue gets sequestered in the deep abysses for perpetuity. So the more there is kelp, the more carbon will be drawn down. But it's also an amazing habitat for so much marine life, including the sea urchins, on which some of these economies depend in southern Chile. So many good reasons there to restore kelp. If you are an industry and you're far away from the ocean, you can invest in projects like this one, and that will take you to an ocean positive approach. But there are more things that you can do as an individual. And this is Kate Morrissey, a 9-year-old who in May 2020 decided to auction her paintings and raised $1,400 for an ocean conservation group. She is an example of something that you can do from a very far away located city, away from the oceans, but feeling that sentiment of interconnectedness and contributing. Now, anybody really can do an ocean positive pledge with your lifestyle, with your daily choices. And here are just some examples of that to finish up. If you want to be plastic wise, you can go on ocean.org, you can sign your pledge, and we will walk you through step by step what you can do to reduce your plastic consumption, to avoid single-use plastics, minimize the use of single-use plastics, and prevent plastics from entering the oceans. If you are a seafood lover, of course, you can go for only sustainably sourced fish or shrimp, oysters. That, of course, requires that there are adequate labels on your seafood. And I am totally aware that that is not entirely the case around the planet. In some countries, in Europe, in North America, those labels have taken great traction. But Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia are examples of where these labels are not so easy to find in the marketplace. So, but that is one alternative. Be prudent with the way you consume your seafood. Be critical. You can also engage in shoreline cleanups if some organizations are organizing them, or you can organize them yourself. Nothing to stop you from collecting debris from the shorelines. This is to be true, not an attempt to clean the oceans. This is more to obtain information about who are the biggest perpetrators. And OceanWise produces a yearly report called The Dirty Dozen. And in that Dirty Dozen, you get the perpetrators that allow you to influence land policy, to go upstream and talk to the industry. So numerous ways where you can engage. This is really a fantastic journey, I have to say, and one that I am super excited about. To deliver ocean conservation at a planetary scale, it cannot be done by a single individual and neither by a single organization. This has to be the collective of humankind, recognizing our interdependency on the health of the oceans and living in a way that allows the oceans to come back and offer us all of these incredible ecosystem services on which we all rely on.